Call Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm rising to speak in support of the taxation annual rates for 2015-16 Research and Development Remedial Matters Bill. But Mr Speaker, first of all, I'd just like to address a couple of the points made by previous speakers on the government side, and I think a couple of them actually need correcting, Mr Speaker. The first one is one of the members held up LanzaTech as a great example of a New Zealand company that had received a whole lot of grants for the government and wasn't this wonderful in the technology they'd created. Well, yes, it was a very good story up to a point. That point, however, was crossed when they realised, Mr Speaker, that there was not the business environment within this country that allowed them to stay here. LanzaTech is a great example, Mr Speaker, of a New Zealand company that came up with a fantastic, innovative idea and they went to the United States of America. They have an American CEO and CV. Their head office is based in the United States and they're doing all their work out of America. And the reason for that, Mr Speaker, is because this government did not create the sort of environment that allows these companies to stay here, employ Kiwis, earn export dollars and thrive and grow to big companies. They felt as if they had to go to the United States, and this is where the current business regime is wrong. And the thing about these R&D tax credits, which are a great idea, it's been Labor's policy for the last two elections, is perhaps if these had existed 6 years ago, then perhaps companies or organisations like LanzaTech would be able to stay in New Zealand. I don't know the exact reasons why they left, even though I've talked to some of the people who work there. They just did not feel as if New Zealand was supportive enough. And this is the amazing thing. We often hear that National is the party of business, but when you look at the policies, it's actually Labor that creates the environment that allows businesses to thrive. I remember talking to one of my very good friends in business, Mr Speaker, and he said to me, I've got a real dilemma. He said, I'm a businessman, Mum and Dad were National, but my business always does better under Labor. And I think that's the feeling across a lot of the business sector, because there's more money in the economy, there's a lot more incentives for business to grow, and we support them a lot more as opposed to the hands-off. And this R&D tax credit in here, I mean, it's not a bad idea. Anything that gives small businesses a chance has got to be good. But I suspect, Mr Speaker, that when we come back for the second reading, committee stage and third reading, this bill will look quite different. The reason I say this, and let's not get caught up in the fact that this is about small businesses. First of all, the business has got to be able to make a loss. So if they're making a loss after 5 years, it gets really expensive, and they can only claim up to a maximum of $2 million after 5 years. And how this bill defines significant R&D, because that's the significant intensity of activity in R&D. That is the definition of if a company is going to be allowed to claim this R&D tax back, and that is how it's defined as a portion of expenditure on labour that is engaged in R&D, and this is used as a proxy to measure intensity. Well, good luck with that. And the reason I say that, Mr Speaker, is we often hear that New Zealand has one of the lowest R&D spends in the OECD. In fact, Andrew Bailey talked about before that the government has an aspiration of 1% of GDP on R&D. Goodness me, if that's aspirational, then heaven help us. To get up to, it's generally accepted, to get to the really high end of R&D spend, you need about 14 to 20% of your revenue spent on R&D. So 1% is about what Fonterra spends, and that is why we are a huge commodity economy based on exchange rates, international variables that we have no control over. If we really want to get to a highly specialised non-commodity economy, then 1% spent on R&D, goodness me. But part of the problem at the moment, Mr Speaker, is for the vast majority of R&D, you've got to capitalise it so you can't expense it. I suspect that if you actually went out to companies and said, okay, you can expense all your R&D no matter if you're big or small or whatever size, suddenly you would find that the R&D spend in this country is significantly higher than it is at the moment. But what people do at this point in time is they don't call it R&D, they call it an operational expense or whatever, so it's expense. And I suspect that might happen with this bill. So as someone on the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, I know myself and my colleagues will be looking very hard at this to make sure that it can't be gamed. And the classic case, Mr Speaker, is to say, oh well, we've got to have a portion of expenditure on labour that's engaged in R&D to be able to claim this back, then Joe, who's sweeping the floors, that's a very innovative brew, mate. You're doing a lot of good work. You are engaged in R&D. So the thing about a tax system is it's got to have high level of integrity. And one of the speakers before talked about the fact that our tax system is very simple and it's fair. Well, that is true by and large, Mr. Speaker, but if we put processes or taxes or tax rebates in place that are easily gained, then it erodes the integrity of the tax system. However, one of the speakers, who I must admit, we've got to be a little bit careful here, but he has a lot to gain. He talked about the evils of capital gains tax. I suspect that if Mr. Scott has done very well, and we applaud that, we accept success, but I suspect if he had to sell some of his assets, he would be up for a mighty big capital gains tax bill, where if he did it now under National, he'd be fine. I wouldn't want to say conflict of interest at all, Mr. Speaker, but the thing about a capital gains tax is it makes the system fair. What it actually does, Mr. Speaker, and I'm just responding to a query that was put forward over here. What a capital gains tax does, Mr. Speaker, is it says if you're earning revenue, then you should pay tax on that. And I think that is a fundamental principle of any tax system. Tax avoidance through not paying capital gains tax is really ripping off the whole country. And I don't think that is right at all, Mr. Speaker, in any way, shape or form. But the interesting thing is we hear from government benches that this bill is designed to help small companies reduce their tax compliance, etc. Well, the interesting fact is that people in one or two person business and companies, so we're talking about the tradesmen, the tradeswomen, you're very good at what they do, and then they go out, they employ one or two people to help the business grow. They're never going to be a Fletcher's or a Carter Holt, but they serve the community well. These are the companies that are the backbone of our economy. They spend about 15% of revenue on tax compliance. Now, I don't know if they would say that the tax system is fair and simple. I suspect that they would argue that it could be a lot simpler and perhaps could be a lot fairer. But, that's the nature of business, and I think the great thing about Labor is we signalled at the last election, we'll certainly be taking into 2017, a much fairer tax system for all businesses, but especially for small businesses, Mr. Speaker, because spending 15% of your revenue on tax compliance, I think any member would agree, is simply too much of a burden. The other thing about this bill, Mr. Speaker, is child support. Now, I think every MP who sat in an MP's office and heard constituents would agree that a simple, effective child support system that made it easier for children is an absolute must. Now, there is no doubt about this at all, Mr. Speaker, but I tell you already, this last week, I've had two constituents that I met with in my office, Mr. Speaker, saying, this is ridiculous. I'm a hell of a lot worse off. I don't know how I'm going to cope. And I have no doubt at all, Mr. Speaker, that this bill will go through. We're supporting it. But the child support legislation will be back in this House again and again because we haven't got it right. We simply haven't got it right. And the thing that concerns me, Mr. Speaker, is when we talked about child support, there was an initial budget of $30 million. Now, to you and I, $30 million on a system sounds like a lot of money. But no, then it went up to $130 million, and you think we're in the wrong game. $130 million for a system that's a tack on to the current system, but no, wait, there's more. Now they're talking about $200 million for this child support. And one thing we do know, Mr. Speaker, is at the moment in New Zealand, there's about 25% of children who live in poverty. Now, that's not a Labor or a national measure. That is a measure put forward by the Commissioner of Children. I suspect $200 million would have made a whole lot of children really happy. But no, it is going to be spent on the child support system. Now, it started at 30, it's 200. How much further is this going to go? This has turned what was a reasonably simple process, but it needed tweaking into quite a complicated one. And the last point I will make, Mr. Speaker, before you tell me to stand down, is I remember in 2008, Peter Dunn promising that he was going to revise the child support regime and it would be done in a year. And I asked them about 5 times as our revenue spokesperson, when's it coming? When's it coming? Well, it's a little bit like deja vu. I'm back. I might as well not have taken 3 years off. And we're still dealing with it now. I don't think that is fair to the mothers and the fathers, but especially the children of New Zealand. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.